Welcome back to Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and I am your host. On today's show, we welcome Jessica McAllister. Jessica is here to talk about what she feels we need to do in order to attract more technicians into the industry. What I think makes this episode great is that it's coming from the shoes of a young tech, and more specifically, a young female technician. I'm always intrigued by those viewpoints of young people entering this industry, and this should be a really, really good show. Welcome, Jessica.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
How are things in the shop right now? Are you busy?
Um, it feels like we're finally starting to get caught up from, I guess, the summer and where we were, but yeah, we're still busy.
I think that's a perpetual shop feeling, is that you're just always kind of running from behind and
Yeah,
trying to catch up.
yeah, I think so.
Well, it's great to have you on the show. We had a intro call before the show, and I was really impressed with your background and really everything about you, and how you've really kind of carved this path for yourself. So before we dive really deep into that, I do like to do what we do in all shows, which is kind of hear your origin story, where you started at, and why you decided to get into this field. And maybe just to take a step back, we should talk about what you actually do. So you tell us a little bit about what you do in your current role.
Okay, yeah. So I've worked in the trucking industry for 6.5 years now. The last 4.5 of those have been as a lead tech. So that's what I do right now. I'm a lead tech for second shift for a fleet company.
As I was going through my intro, I had to take a step back because I was like, wait a minute, we're leaving out a really big point here, in that you're a diesel tech, and not only a diesel tech, a really good diesel tech. So
Oh,
it's pretty
well,
cool
thank you.
to have you on the show. So now let's talk about what got you into the industry. Like, what was it? Was it when you were a little girl? You're aspiring to be a diesel tech, or how did this come about?
Um, so my dad was an industrial maintenance and motorcycle technician when I was growing up. So I always wanted to be involved in whatever he was doing and help him, and I loved learning. I did get myself in trouble a few times growing up, taking things apart that I should not have unsupervised. Um, but I don't remember exactly when I decided to become a mechanic, but I think sometime in high school, and it just kind of made sense, I guess you'd say. But at that point, I thought that I wanted to go into automotive. And then I was talking to someone one day and telling them that I was about to go to tech school for automotive after graduation. And they said, "Oh, you should work on trucks instead." And I didn't grow up around trucks or the trucking industry, or even diesel engines for that matter. So it just honestly wasn't something that I had ever even considered up until that point. And my initial reaction was, why? I had no, yeah, I just was like, why would I do that? Why? And they actually didn't even have a good reason, a good selling point for me. They were just like, ah, you should. But that did get me thinking. And so I did a little bit of research, and like cars were never anything that I was super passionate about. I was passionate about becoming a technician. So cars just kind of made sense, I guess you could say. It seemed like the most logical way to go. Um, but then when I looked into trucks, I was like, wait, I'm really interested in this. So I signed up for the local community college diesel program, and I just jumped right in, not knowing a single thing about trucks whatsoever.
Did your friends have an idea that this might be the path that you would go, or like, if you recall coming out of high school, was that something that was on the radar?
No, no, I don't
No.
think so. No, not at all. I think they thought I would work on cars, not trucks. So they were pretty surprised, but all my friends were pretty supportive, and most people were pretty supportive of it.
And that's amazing. And so when you go back, And I'm asking you to kind of go back a few years here to talk about this, where when you're doing that initial research, what was it that kind of stuck out to you? Is it just that trucks are cool and you wanted to dive in, or was there some other aspect that drove you that route?
Hmm. Um, I'm not even totally sure. Honestly, what brought me in? I think I was just like, yeah, this is cool. This looks really interesting. Um, yeah, I don't even know exactly what initially brought me in actually.
Was it intimidating at first? I mean, when you go and maybe this industry that you don't know a ton about, you decide that you're going to select that career path, you're going to school. And I always say, when I first came into the industry, and especially I spent a little time on the heavy truck side, it can be an intimidating place, right? I mean, a lot of times you get huge shops with big trucks and there's a lot going on, but walk me through that piece. Was it intimidating? Was it, like, give me an idea of where you stood there?
Oh my goodness. Yes. The first couple of semesters were rough. I have to say, they were hard. Um, I remember my first day of class. Some of the other guys were over there talking, and they were talking about their diesel pickups. And they were like, oh, my 12 valve, blah, 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 P pump, blah, blah. And I'm like, what are these words? Like, what are they talking about? I couldn't have told you anything, anything. And so I was just beyond lost at first. And there for a minute, I was like, oh, maybe I am making a mistake. um, but yeah, I pushed through, and I did. I think I had to do more studying probably than most of the other people in my class did. Um, but yeah, it worked out, I would say. I got through
Well,
it.
what makes you push through right there? Because I feel like a lot of young people will just say, "Hey, this isn't for me. I made kind of an error in judgment here, and I'm going to go back to a different industry." But what made you power through in that moment?
Mm. Yeah, it would have been really easy at that point to just say, no, not for me. This is too hard. Um, I think I just had to think back to initially how excited I was to learn and how much I wanted to become a technician. Um, so I think I just realized I needed to push through at that point and at least try.
Well, I have to imagine there's almost like a little bit of a chip on your shoulder at that point too, right? Where you're like, I'm going to prove all these people wrong. They might not think I can do it, but I know I'm smart enough, and if I put the work in, I'm going to be good at this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. One of my factors was actually one of my instructors told me that he would not hire a woman in his shop.
Oh,
So, yes. And so that's so frustrating to hear.
yeah.
So, at that point, I had to be the best in his class. So,
I
and I
love your
was.
attitude toward that, though. Like, I love that attitude because, one, it's very disappointing to hear that any instructor would ever say that. And two, the fact that you took that and didn't just like put your head down and walk away, but you made it that driving factor of, you know what, I do want to be the best at this. I think so many
Mhm.
young people, not just young females, but young people in general, could use that advice to say, hey, you're going to face some adversity. And this is for any career, right? This isn't just our field. This is any
Mhm.
career that you're going to face some adversity. And when you do, you can kind of choose one of two routes, and you chose the really, really good one.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you can let it tear you down or you can use it to motivate you.
So as you go through school, I'm guessing you're starting to get a little bit more respect because you're picking up on things and maybe having a
Mhm.
better understanding. I honestly think you had an advantage right there in how your approach went versus some people that might have already had some background in it, because
Mhm.
you really went in with a maybe a mindset of, I want to learn this, I want to grow with this. And I think a lot of people do still go to school just to check the box, right? Even in our industry, we
Mhm.
talk a lot about it with the 4-year route, but there are plenty. on the tech school side that really kind of do that same thing. And I always tell our audience that if I were to go back and give my younger self some advice, it would be, you're not there just to get the degree. You're there to actually learn, and you're there to learn how to learn, right? Because when you get into a shop, critical thinking is a huge factor in being able to think through a problem and understand how a system works. And if you just kind of surface level know things, and I went to school with some kids that at the tech school level that could say all the words, but they couldn't do anything, right? They had read the magazines, but they weren't necessarily translating that into a skill. So I think it had somebody like that taken your mentality of, okay, I really do want to learn this, and I'm not, I'm going in saying I don't know anything about this, and I'm going to learn it. I think you have an advantage over a lot of young people when you take that mindset.
Yeah, I think so. I there were some people in my class, like you were saying, that were just there just to get the degree, just to look better on a resume. Um, but I do think trade school is very valuable because it teaches you the how and the why. Whereas if you just jumped right into a shop and learned, you're not going to learn that. No one's going to sit down and teach you electrical theory. They just aren't. So, yeah, I think trade school is very valuable.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit then. With you mentioned electrical theory, and I feel like sometimes it's really difficult because there are times where maybe you'll learn it first semester of your first year and maybe not apply it until 2 or 3 years down the road, right? Was it hard to kind of recall what you had learned in school, or did it come pretty natural to you?
I think there were some aspects that I was like, "Ooh, I know I learned this, but I don't remember what it was." But I think a lot of it did come back to me. I wasn't doing much hands-on right after school. I started as a service advisor. Um, but at least I was still in the industry. I was still working with the stuff. So, yeah.
Well, and so now we're going to transition to this next piece, because this is another really fascinating part about your story, is that you started off as a service advisor. And can you talk to us a little bit about why you started off as a service advisor, not a tech?
Yes. So, I applied to multiple different places while going to school and after graduating, and I couldn't get a call back. And it was so frustrating. For one thing, you hear about a technician shortage, but then I was like, here I am. I'm ready to work. I'm ready to go. Let's do this. And I couldn't even get a phone call back. So that was extremely frustrating for me. But I was able to at least find a job as a service advisor. And it was with the understanding that I would give that a shot. I would try that for a while. And then if I for sure wanted to move onto the floor, that when there was an opening, they would let me do so. Um, but I do think that is one thing that with the technician shortage, I think shops maybe need to be a little more open-minded. I know that initially they want people who they think will fit, obviously, um, but maybe just be a little more open-minded about who that might be.
Well, and it's interesting because I think, as you talked about right there, is we do have this big shortage of people, yet maybe a lack of open mindedness as to who could help us fix this shortage. And seeing you front and center as somebody that did really, I mean, you're chomping at the bit to get in a shop, right? And we're,
Yeah.
as an industry out here trying to beg people to come into our industry. And here is this person that really really wants to get their hands dirty. They want to get in a shop, and they
Mm-hmm.
really want to attack this, and yet we're pushing some level of resistance against them. I obviously think that's something that our industry needs to improve on. I actually think we have improved as a
Mm-hmm.
whole, but we're not to where we need to be, right? And I think that's one of the things that, in hearing your background and your message, it is a little bit frustrating because and I'm not even in your shoes, right? Like you went through it, you went through those times where you're applying and you're hearing about this technician shortage, yet you're not getting any calls back, and then really kind of had to force your way in the front door by taking that service advisor position, which I give
Mhm.
you a lot of credit for because I still think there's a lot you probably learned in that service advisor position,
Mhm.
right? Like as it applied
Yeah.
to the shop.
Yeah, for sure.
Did you like doing the service advising?
Um, no. Um, Not really. I wouldn't say it was really for me, but there were aspects of it I liked. For one thing, my boss told me in a review that I had poor time management skills. Um, and I can't say that I disagree. I was really bad about just jumping from one thing to another. Um, so there were aspects of it that I think did help me become a better technician because it let me work on some things without being under so much pressure.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, just kind of slowly easing into the industry was nice.
Yeah, and I think at some level it has to give you some respect to those service advisors too, right? Because I think a lot of times when you're not, say you come in directly as a technician and you've never sat in that chair, it is a very challenging position. There are a lot of elements to it, and I think at some level it probably had to give you some respect for that position.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. It is not as easy as it may seem.
It isn't, and I try to tell people all the time that, especially shops, like if you're bringing in a newer technician, there is some level of importance of having that person sit in the manager's office, having them sit in the service advisor's chair for a little bit, and just helping them understand so that when there is maybe some form of conflict within the shop, that at least they can have an understanding of where each other are at and how
Mhm.
difficult both jobs are. Both jobs are tough, right? Like it's not like being a diesel tech is easy, but it's just a different job altogether. And if you're that tech and you're sitting in the shop and you look at that advisor and they're sitting on their chair all day and you're like they're lazy, they're not doing anything,
Yeah.
you kind of know it's not that way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's like, what are you doing all day? Like, no, no, give them a break, please.
Well, so then how did it work to get you in the shop then? I'm assuming you saw an opening come out and said, "Hey, I'm still here, still want to go out there."
Yes. So I had approached my boss, and about a year and a half of being a service advisor, I guess I had kind of a renewed passion of, okay, yes, I for sure still want to become a technician. I still want to do this. And so I approached my manager and I talked to him. And he said, yeah, I kind of thought that was coming. He was not surprised by it at all. And he said, okay, well, the next opening, come back and talk to me. Because at that point, there weren't any openings. I just brought up the conversation with him. And then later in the year, our second shift lead was retiring. And so I was like, okay, this is my chance, but not to be a lead, just thinking someone else would go to his position and then I could take their job. Um, well, my boss instead decided, yeah, I think you'd be a great lead. Just jump on in there. And so I guess that was one of those be careful what you ask for kind of moments. Um, but
How did that
he,
go? Like
oh,
you jumped right in as a lead? Like that's
yes,
a big jump.
yes. And I actually told my boss, I said, I don't think I'm qualified for this. And he said, the main thing about being a lead is more about being responsible and being trustworthy than it is knowing how to fix trucks, in his opinion. And he said, I think that you'll do great. And it was second shift as well. So it was, you're kind of on your own, really, for second shift, you know? And he said, no, I have faith in you. I think you'll do okay. Um,
Well, Credit to him for seeing that, right? Because it's almost
Yes.
the opposite of the first experience you had where you're trying to bust your way in the door. Now you've gotten your foot in the door. You've kind of proven your stripes a little bit, or you earned your stripes a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And they did escalate you. And I think at some level, they had to have some trust in you to be able to do that, right? And so I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a huge credit to you, but I also think it's a huge credit to the hiring manager to actually kind of take that leap of faith and have it work out.
Yeah. Yeah. I was flattered. I was also extremely nervous, but and the other issue that I thought I was going to have was moving to second shift. One of the other guys on that shift was 60. He had been doing the job since literally before I was born. And so I really thought he was going to have issues with, okay, here's this 24-year-old girl coming in telling me what to do. And I was so nervous. I was like, oh boy, here we go. But it actually worked out so well. He didn't want to be a lead. He just wanted to come in, do his job, and go home. He didn't want the extra responsibility. So it wasn't like he was upset that I got it and he didn't. And he said, good. I don't like sending emails. You can send all the emails. You can answer all the phones. You can do all the paperwork. Great. Just tell me what you want from me. And we actually got along so well. Like we worked together so well, which was so much better than the anticipated, but I'm so thankful.
Isn't it funny how you get teamed up with somebody that's got a lot of experience like him, and how much of a blessing it is just to be able to have that person to lean on. And I think when a young person goes in, and I can't imagine you were this way, where like you'll have some young people that go in and maybe they think they know it all, or anything like that. But I have a feeling you knew going in, just based on how stressed out you were about, or nervous you were about that, that person and that first day, that you wanted to make a relationship with that person, and you wanted to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that you were kind of rowing in the same direction together.
Yeah, yeah, I am so thankful for him. Like I cannot even express. The first few months, I was the opposite of what you were saying, where I thought I knew everything. I thought I didn't know anything, and I doubted myself so much. Um, and he would actually get irritated with me because I'd go up to him and I'd ask him a question, and he'd be like, "You know the answer. Stop second guessing yourself. Why are you even asking me right now?" So yeah, just the support I got from him was incredible.
What is his first name?
Denny.
Denny. Well,
Yeah.
shout out Denny. We need more
Yes.
Denny's in this world.
Yes.
I think all of us have. I tell this story all the time, but I still have the business card from one of my first mentors that hangs in my office, and it means a lot when somebody has that attitude and really wants to take somebody under their wing, regardless if their position is higher, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you can build such a good working relationship with somebody whose skill sets, frankly, they mirror each, or they really complement each other. Not mirror each other, they
Mm-hmm.
complement each other. So in that scenario, you could do some of those emails that he hates doing, and he could show you maybe
Mm-hmm.
a trick or two about working on stuff. So I love those types
Yes.
of pairings.
Yeah, and actually, it also got to the point where I was more of the computer and diagnostic person, and then he helped me with more of the mechanical aspects of it that I didn't know. So yeah, we really did. We paired really well.
Is your shop looking to fill open positions or grow your bench of candidates? Consider adding WrenchWay to your recruiting efforts. WrenchWay helps shops and dealerships all across the U.S. find better qualified candidates for their service centers. WrenchWay Top Shop memberships are only $150 per month and include unlimited job postings on the best job board in the industry, a guarantee of 10 qualified applicants, and the shops choose who is considered qualified, access to connect with and help over 650 high schools and post secondary schools, and much more. Learn more about WrenchWay's Top Shop memberships by visiting WrenchWay.com and selecting the For Shops tab under the Solutions dropdown. Link is in the show notes. How was it going to second shift right off the bat? And I know there are a lot of companies out there that are looking for second shift employees. I was actually just had a conversation with Fleet Maintenance Magazine last week. They're looking for somebody to do a story on working second shift or running a second shift operation, because it is a little harder to find people. It is a different time frame. You almost kind of live a different life, right? Because you're oftentimes working when everybody else is at home.
Yeah. I've never really been much of a morning person. I've got to say.
So second shift worked out great.
Yeah, it worked out well. And my husband works a similar shift. We're not quite the same hours, but we're closer than we are when I was working on first shift. And it's a lot calmer as well. We do still have some issues. We have some random things come in, some phone calls, some road calls, but it's overall a lot calmer. The service manager is gone. It's just a lot calmer, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think it might also give you a little bit more of a relaxed atmosphere to learn in too, right? As you're learning this industry, you're learning how to repair things. It isn't, there just isn't as many people in the shop at that point. There's not maybe the customer activity that you might get over the course of the day or the phone calls. So I think there's a lot of benefits to working that second shift, and there's probably a lot of people that would like it more than they even think.
Yes. Yeah. I actually told my boss came to me and just asked how I enjoyed my shift. Some people were wanting to move around, and he just kind of was checking in on people to see how they liked their shift. And I said, if you move me to first shift, I'll quit. I was joking for the most part. But no, I really do. I love second shift. I couldn't imagine going back to first shift.
Well, your boss sounds awesome in general. The fact that he is going around and checking and making sure that everybody's okay and that they're good. I, again, could use more of that in our industry. So very cool to hear that.
Yes. Yeah. Agreed.
All right. So we're on second shift. We're team lead. And now things are starting to hum along, right? You're starting to become pretty good as far as a tech goes. And you're getting this experience under your belt. What has your experience been up until this point? I mean, have you fought some of the common complaints that maybe female technicians have or young technicians have in general of, broke the barrier, you're in the shop? What are you struggling with now?
I don't feel like I had too many struggles other than the fact that there was a lot of negativity in the shop. Not towards me or towards people, but more towards the industry and their jobs. And something I realized is it just takes one negative person, really, and other people can just feed off that negativity. So I would say that negativity was one of the main problems of if I had $1 for every time I heard someone say, I hate trucks, I could probably retire or I hate my job, and I get that. You have those days. Absolutely. You do.
That's any job, right?
Yeah, for sure. But I think just trying to stay positive in all the negativity was one of my biggest issues. But we hired a couple more people who are just like the most positive human beings that you've ever met. I'm not sure that they ever have a bad day. And it was actually crazy to see how much that they were just able to turn everything around, honestly.
Yeah, and it's just so much easier to work around people that are positive and that have kind of that upbeat attitude. I'm curious, if any of the more experienced techs or really anybody in the industry, was there anybody that ever told you that you were crazy for being in the industry or that you should leave the industry?
Yeah, actually. So, the one who was my main and still is my main mentor, um, pretty much, yeah, said, "Why are you here? What are you doing? You could go do anything else. You're too smart for this one." And so that was, I don't know, kind of funny to hear from him that just go do anything else, basically.
Well, it's kind of a compliment, and I think a compliment more than a slight, right? Because what they're trying to say is, "Hey, you're really talented. You're really good at what you're
Mm-hmm.
doing. Why would you be in the shop here with me?" And in
Yeah.
reality, if I just came back from a couple of work trips, and some of the people that I met, I was just down at Apex and SEMA down in Vegas,
Hmm.
and the amount of people that had a technical background, meaning they started off in a shop and they started off wrenching, that have turned their careers into something incredible, and I think that are pretty enviable amongst others, uh, started off with this background, and they have this background and
Mm-hmm.
they have the ability. And the one thing that I can point to with you right off the bat is that you've got a good personality. You seem like a really positive person, and you also have that technical skill. And when you pair all of that together, you've got a pretty talented individual. So I get, I think that person that's been in the shop for 40 years, maybe they have been mistreated in prior jobs, or maybe they've seen the impact that it can have on their bodies over time. But I do think the industry has really started to shift in terms of, one, how seriously we take safety and how seriously we
Mm-hmm.
take, hey, you have that big heavy truck part, because what you're lifting is far heavier than anything you're going to lift on a car. Maybe we should get the proper lifting device for it now, rather than the way that I grew up in the industry, which is, oh, I gotta go lift it.
Yeah.
It's we've we've just, maybe, I think, as an industry, started to accept that, hey, there are some things, if we just approach it the right way, are easier than we make it on ourselves. And then there are some other things where, that's more the physical side. More the emotional side, I think, is if somebody had been mistreated by a former boss, or maybe they've worked in numerous shops where everybody they work with is negative, and it's just a terrible environment to go into. And that's where I think your kind of ray of positivity here is so refreshing, because you're a prime example that we have some incredibly smart people in this industry, some incredibly positive people in this industry, and yet they kind of end up overshadowed by a lot of the negative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. Yeah. It's so easy to let the negative take over, but I think you have to fight and make sure that it doesn't.
How do you do that? Like, how do you, when you're in a shop, and granted, you've culturally got a great shop to work in now, but you've
Mm-hmm.
been a part of some where maybe that wasn't the case. How do you keep your mindset like positive and really energizing, so that when you come into work, you're ready to go?
Um, so I think one thing is people can be negative when they're stressed. So I think stress is one of the big factors for it. Um, and just taking a breath and realizing that if it doesn't get done, it doesn't get done. It'll be okay at the end of the day. The world's not going to end. Helps. And I know a lot of my other coworkers need to hear that sometimes. Like, hey, it's okay. It's okay if it doesn't happen. It's okay if the bolt breaks. It's fine. And I think that a lot of times people just need to hear that. Also, one funny thing that I've started doing is I'll pick a random positive quote that's not relevant to anything at all that they're doing. And they'll ask me a question, and I'll just give them the random positive quote out of nowhere. And one, it's kind of funny. Two, it mildly irritates them. So that's fun for me. when you're struggling and someone just gives you a random quote, you're like, what do I do with this?
Right. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, but it kind of does make them take a breath and be like, okay, all right, maybe I need to calm down.
That's a unique perspective. I mean, something that's a little bit different and is, I think, kind of funny. I have a story similar to that where when I first started working in a shop, there was an individual who I'm still really good friends with to this day that I would say hi to him, and I'll say his name, Dave. I'd walk past Dave and walk past him, and he would just kind of grunt at me. He wouldn't even like look at me. He wouldn't do anything. And so every day I just kind of kept getting more obnoxious with how I said hi to him. And then finally one day, like he cracked a smile. I'm like, I got him. Like
Yeah,
that's
yes,
and
yes.
still to this day we're friends. And it was because like you got him to loosen up a little bit. And you hit on a really good point there in that, especially with young techs, if you do break that bolt or you're trying to rewire something, you break a connector, or something happens that
Mm-hmm.
kind of puts a roadblock in your day, it can really set you down a negative path early. And I struggled with
Yes.
that early in my career too. I totally get that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I'm absolutely guilty of it as well sometimes, for sure.
Well, it does stink because if you snap that bolt off, now you're the one that has to get that bolt out, and hopefully it's not in too tough of a spot, or that it's not too much of a bear to get out, because that can set you back several hours. In some cases I've seen people make errors that set them back several days, and that
Yeah.
can really ruin your week really fast.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it can.
Well, let's kind of keep going on that young tech thing. And being that you are a younger tech in this industry, when you came in, was there anything that surprised you, or that you maybe liked more than you thought you would, or maybe disliked more than you thought you would?
Um, so one thing that this is kind of odd, but one thing that I was looking forward to was working alone. I know that's strange to say, but I'm someone that just likes to just get in and just jump in it and just get it done, kind of without any outside influence or help. And I do still like that, but I think one thing that surprised me was also how much I can enjoy working with other people. And most of the people in my shop are incredibly helpful. And so I think that's one thing that kind of surprised me was actually just learning to work better with others.
Well, it's kind of that teammate thing, right? And you went into that team
Mm-hmm.
lead role, and I think it gives you a different viewpoint on how important it is that we do have people working together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Okay, so we're in. How much of a barrier were tools for you? Like in terms of being able to get the tools you needed and that kind of stuff.
Um, so when I started, I had a pretty good set of basic tools. And then I will say I got sucked into the Snap on truck, as most young techs do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Guilty.
Um,
Also, yes.
yeah. Um, so I don't think it was too bad. Also, I know I've heard a lot of the places say, oh, if you have to borrow it twice or whatever, you need to buy it. And that's true. I agree. If you're constantly borrowing something, you probably do just need to borrow it, or I mean, buy it yourself. But another thing about our shop working together so well is no one really complains about sharing their own tools even. And that's a pretty big thing, I think, for most
It
shops.
is.
It's like, no, this is mine, don't touch it. But most people are very open to sharing, and we've also got quite a few shop tools. And if you go up to the service manager and you're like, hey, I think we could really use this in the shop, he's pretty willing to work with us. So tools weren't too bad.
That's good, because I do think you mentioned kind of that I don't even want to call it a trap because it's a lot of fun to go on the Snap-on truck and see the latest and greatest or any of the tool vendors. And I think where I try to educate young techs is to make sure they understand that what is the ROI that you're getting on that tool, right? Like, is that tool
Mm-hmm.
actually going to make you money? In a lot of cases, when they come off the truck and they've got an $8,000 toolbox and barely any tools, that is very concerning, right? Because you're like, that
Mm-hmm.
toolbox isn't going to make you any money. Those tools will,
Yeah.
but that toolbox isn't. So just trying to educate younger people on, if you're taking on debt, make sure you're smart with the type of debt that you're taking on. And then I think, when you do go in there, they're salespeople, right? Like they want you to buy more tools. They have companies to run. They're trying to get more tools sold. But I've also seen a lot of people get themselves in really bad trouble doing that, right? Where maybe they're
Mm-hmm.
taking on way more than they can pay back and they're doing it, they're trying to get everything at once. And it's just, you know, maybe there's times when you want that snap-on tool, but there's an equivalent, or not maybe equivalent, but just, there's a Harbor Freight tool that can do the job and
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to spend the money right away. Right. So it's, it is when you talk about that, that's one of those where I'm like, yeah, that's something we do have to have more conversations around, and we do have to better educate our young people so they are at least prepared and know what they're signing up for.
Yes. Yeah. Anytime we've gotten a new tech, we've been like, don't get on that truck, which is probably a little too harsh, but we're like, don't do it.
Well, in a lot of cases, they don't even know what they need yet, right? So
Yeah.
it's being able to, like you did, start off with that starter set, kind of build on that as
Mm-hmm.
you kind of have the need. So yeah, I think it's just being smart and being educated, being financially literate for a young person coming into this industry.
Yeah.
And so yeah, great point there. Now I do want to talk. I hate going negative because you're a positive person, but there is still a lot of a negative narrative around this industry, and I think that has been magnified by social media because a lot of times
Mm-hmm.
you'll go on, I'm sure you've been on different forms of social where you go on and kind of read all of these horror stories or just really negative viewpoints on the industry, and it to me is hard because some of them are true, some of them are maybe not being treated well, but then you have the other piece where there's just some negative people and they outshine all of the positive people that are out there. Is that something that you see when you're out on social, whatever social media platform it is?
I do see that some. Yeah. I think, like we said, you'll always have a bad day, or, you'll always have a bad experience sometimes. Um, but social media has become a good way for people to vent sometimes, I think. And it may not be that that's how they feel all the time, but that's how they're feeling in that moment. But it comes off as it's more common than maybe what people feel. And that is hard to get people into the industry when all they see is negatives. And you're over here like, no, no, it's not that bad. I promise. It's kind of hard to sell that sometimes.
Well, you think about your exact scenario, right? Where you were kind of making the decision between automotive and diesel, and if you were going out somewhere and reading just negative about, maybe even both sides of the industry, that could have veered you to go to a completely different path altogether had you read into it and not thought for yourself, right? And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
the danger we've got in this industry right now is that if we continue to let that negative kind of lead the narrative, we're really going to struggle with this for a long time. It's going to be hard to get people in because, unfortunately, not everybody is as forward thinking as you are in being able to kind of think through what you were wanting in your path. And I think you had the wherewithal to be able to maybe make your own decision on it. Whereas, even me as a young person, had I gone out and read all of that, I don't know that I would have stuck with it, right? Like maybe I do read that and say, okay, maybe it is easier to go in this different route, and
Mm-hmm.
in doing so, would have missed out on a bunch of different opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what I'm getting to there is, how do you curb that? How do you maybe get more of a positive presence from technicians out in the wild and onto the different social platforms? Because in a lot of ways, I think the people that are happy are the ones that are just, hey, I'm just working, right? Like, it's not anything
Yeah.
too crazy. So it's it's a really compelling conversation for me, because I don't know that I've got the answer to it.
Yeah. I don't know that I really have the answer either. I guess I would say just the best thing that we can do is if we are having a good experience, or um, just try to share that side of it as much as you can. And don't lie, don't be like, hey, it's all great. But just try to share the more positive aspects on social media as well, and hope that maybe eventually the positivity can kind of outshine the negativity.
I had a tech once tell me that he didn't want to help the technician shortage, and I said, okay, well, why is that? And he said, well, I'm being treated better than I ever have. I'm getting paid better than I ever have, and like he's like, it's created this kind of sense of desperation for our position that's really nice to have every once in a while. And so I'll ask you that, like, what would make you want to get our industry into a better place in terms of how many technicians we have in our shops?
I mean, I have to say he has a valid point. It's funny, but it is a valid point. Um, but no, I think for me, I know that when we're short staffed, I'm more stressed. um, when we're fully staffed, things go a lot smoother. It doesn't seem like I have to work quite as hard. I can kind of take my time on more things. Um, so I think that having more technicians is overall a good thing. Um, we just have to make sure that, I guess, the positives that he was saying from being short staffed, we just try to keep carrying those through when we are fully staffed, I guess.
That's a great point. I think you're absolutely right. And it's funny that you kind of you spun it that way, because I do think that's something we've learned as an industry, is that, okay, yeah, there are things that maybe we could have done better as an industry, and we've done a lot to address a lot of those negatives. Still have things to do, of course, but take those lessons we learned as we're really struggling to get technicians in the door, and apply them, and you should be able to bring more technicians in, right? Because then all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden those negatives are turned into positives. And I've talked to a lot of people about that over the years, where if you are doing a good job at it and you're a shop, make sure that that's heard by those
Mm-hmm.
technicians that are out there, because maybe they're sitting in a shop and it's their second or third shop that they've worked at, and they've all been the same. They've all kind of treated them crummy. They haven't gotten to the right shop yet, and I think that's the hardest part to understand, right? Is
Yeah.
there are some
Yes.
really really great shops out there that treat their people
Yes.
well. You just have to find the right one for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't be afraid to keep looking. I think some people just get discouraged and they'll try one or two shops and be like, oh, well, this must be the industry. But no, I think there are really great shops out there. I can say for a fact there are. You just have to find the one that fits you.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'll hit on, that I think really ties a lot of this together, is that we talked about culture earlier, and we talked about how important people are to culture. And by bringing other people into your shop, whether you're a manager or not, right? If you're that technician that's sitting out there, and maybe you're struggling with some of that negativity in your shop, and there's an opening for a new tech, bringing in a friend that you get along with, that is a good tech, or being able to have a vested interest in making that next person a great hire, is going to make your life better in general. Because if you do go out and find that really really positive person, you do go find that person that's driven and motivated, it makes your life exponentially better, and you're part of the change in having a great culture at that point, rather than kind of
Hmm.
sitting on your hands and complaining that the world isn't right.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
And so that as you talked about that, that made me think in so many different directions, because I do think that is such an important piece, that people understand that you may be resistant, or maybe you're struggling in your job, but if you can help be kind of that force for change, you can help kind of usher in other people. And then when you do get other people in, as a technician, treat them nice. Like, don't be combative, don't be defensive, don't be a jerk right off the bat. Like, help them out. Like,
Yeah.
they're going to remember that, just like your friend that helped you out, right? Was it Denny?
Hmm. Yeah, Denny, yes.
Yeah, just like Denny, right? Like, be Denny when you're in the shop. Be Denny. Like, welcome people in, help make their experience better than yours was, even if yours wasn't great coming
Hmm.
up through the industry, because that will help your shop just become a much, much more positive environment.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Sometimes you have to say and ask yourself, if I don't like it, what can I do to change it? Yeah, agreed.
All right. So I want to take you from your young tech position and put you in the position of what you would give for advice to a younger person entering the industry right now, right? So maybe there's that young female that's out there listening and is weighing options, whether this is a good industry to come into or not. Uh, and I say young woman, but it could be young tech in general, right? Whoever you think of, what advice would you give them to really hit the ground running like you did?
Yeah, I would say it may not be the easiest industry to get into, but if this is something that you think you want to do, don't give up. Um, Even if you feel like giving up, don't give up. Um, and if, like we mentioned, don't just settle on the first shop and think, oh, this must be the industry. If you don't feel welcome, if you don't feel like it's a good fit for you, keep searching, because I bet there will be a good fit for you out there. And then the other thing I would say would be go in with an open mind and listen to what other people, if they're trying to help you, they're usually doing it for good intentions. So just be open to what other people are trying to help. And it's so easy to be defensive. It really is. But just be as open as you can.
That is fantastic advice. And I think anybody that's ever started a new job knows how awkward it is in general, right? It's you're trying to get to know your new coworkers, and they could be people that you end up being friends with, and it's just
Mhm.
it's all this first week jitters, that, and even probably first month jitters, that are just trying to get to know these other people and trying to maybe leave a good first impression. But if you think back to when you've taken a job somewhere and you remember that first person that went out of their way to say hi to you, or that first person that went out of their way to help you, it's oftentimes somebody that you're going to remember for a long time, right? And you're going to have a
Mhm.
positive image of. And I wish we had a little bit more of that in our industry. Again, I think that's another area that we've improved upon. But as and Jessica, I'll put this on your shoulders. As you get older in the industry, that's something that I want you to remember. I want all young technicians to remember is,
Mhm.
how are you brought in the industry? Are there things that you wish were different, that you would have seen differently? Like, you having the resistance to even get in the shop in the first place. Are there things that have been really good? And Denny as a mentor, and really looking out for you, like, just really kind of looking back, and rather than just coming with negative advice, or maybe negative comments, give these young people some opportunities to identify those roadblocks, and help them understand some of the challenges that they're going to see as they get into this, but hopefully assure them that it's going to be all right, and they're going to make a heck of a career for themselves.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
So you'll be able to do that for me.
I'm going to try my best. Yeah.
Well, I think we could always use more like you. I think as you look at this industry? I mean, is that something, how do you want to wrench forever? Or do you, like, you saw some of the office side with being a service advisor, ever any like itch to go back into the office someday, or kind of give me an idea of what you foresee in your career? And maybe you just don't know yet. Maybe it's something where the path will lead you as you go. So I just want to ask you about your vision for your own future.
I know that for the near future, I'm not interested in moving out of the shop. I feel like I fought pretty hard to get here, and I'm not going to give it up so easy. And I enjoy what I do. I really do enjoy it, and it's rewarding for me. I don't particularly envision myself in management, such as a service manager. I don't really see that for myself. But for example, my company, there are tech services people that help, basically tech support, that the techs can call in. Hey, I have this problem. What do I do? So I can see myself maybe moving in that direction of trying to help the techs more and just staying more of the mechanical side of things.
That is cool. And bravo to your company as well for having that path, right? For a talented young person like yourself who has gotten good diagnostically. That's a big need, is that diagnostic support, or the tech support in general. So I think that's the one interesting thing about this industry, is the more you get into it and the more you you get that technical baseline of knowledge. And if you do have aspirations to go forward, there are a lot of steps forward. There are a lot of things that you can do, but it all starts with that really base level technical knowledge. And I still, to this day, some of the people that I respect the most in not only this industry, but in the world, are those techs that have been in the shop for 40 years and that know how to fix anything. And I still geek out when I meet one of them and talk with them and pick their brain. And I think they're some of the smartest, most incredible people in the world. So I think as we talk through this, the fact that you want to keep your foot in the mechanical side is a pretty beautiful thing. It's pretty awesome. So kudos to you. Kudos to everything you've done in your career so far. You've got an extremely bright future ahead of you. And I can't wait to follow it along. I think you're going to do some great things.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it. And hopefully we do kind of a follow-up on this to see, where your career has led and what you've done with your career. So I just thank you for being on the podcast. Appreciate you joining me today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
That wraps up another episode of Beyond the Wrench. If you liked this episode, please show your support by rating and following the podcast. You can also watch the video interviews on WrenchWay's YouTube channel. Speaking of WrenchWay, did you know Beyond the Wrench is managed and produced by the WrenchWay team? WrenchWay is an online community dedicated to promoting and improving automotive and diesel careers. We help technicians find the best shops to work at, and we also help auto, diesel, and CTE instructors get more support from local industry. You can learn more by visiting wrenchway.com.